Greetings from Australia. I would like to respectfully acknowledge the people of India and thank them for the warm welcome and allowing us to speak and share our knowledge in this virtual space. I would like to acknowledge our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the Indigenous peoples of Australia and to recognise their ongoing connections with the land and the sea. Aboriginal or Indigenous Australians are still part of the Commonwealth, comprising of the mainland of the Australian continent, Tasmania in the extreme south, and the Torres Strait Islands between far north Queensland and Papua New Guinea. Today, Indigenous people make up just over 3% of the total population, which has been estimated at approximately 26 million people in 2020. We fly 3 flags on our public buildings, and during national celebrations like Naidoc Week, we fly the national flag, the Aboriginal flag, and the Torres Strait Islander flag. We are not one group. There are over 500 different clan groups or nations around the continent, with many having their own distinct cultures, beliefs, and languages that are still practiced today. Artists continue to hold onto their cultural and spiritual beginnings and continually make reference to their heritage in their work, evident as artists present their work for significant showcase events like the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair. Our land is so diverse. The environments and landscapes from which we draw inspiration is an ever-flowing stream of visual stories and messages we want to convey through our work. Totems, designs and stories shared by our First Nation artists are protected by copyright unless permission is given by the creator or the creators who have worked to execute a collective work. Australian Indigenous author and solicitor Dr. Terry Janke said the protocols endorse the rights of Indigenous people to their cultural heritage and support diverse First Nations creative practice. Naidoc Week is an opportunity for us to celebrate the rich history, culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This year's theme is a common mantra: always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
Welcome everyone to a series of creative conversations on the theme of cultural linkages between Australian and Indian artists, hosted by Arts Nexus Far North Queensland in partnership with the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair and the Australian Consulate based in Chennai, India. Thank you to the team at Arts Front for live streaming this session. Now, our series of conversations is celebrating Naidoc Week 2020 in Australia, National Aboriginal and Islander Day of Celebration. We are Australians' First Nations people, and each year Naidoc Week celebrates a rich and diverse cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Naidoc welcomes you to celebrate with us. So please enjoy the conversations as we have a very eager, distinguished guests with us waiting to talk to you. My name is Jenna Worry and I am the Regional Arts Officer for Far North Queensland. The Regional Arts Service Network is an initiative of Queensland Government through Arts Queensland. My position is managed by Arts Nexus, a support agency that enables creatives and artists across all art forms, across all experience levels and all cultures in our Far North Queensland regions, which includes Cape York and the Torres Straits. Our conversation today is about the politics of language. We will discuss the importance of language and maintaining culture as a prime function of language. Our guests today have been chosen to talk about the ways they have used their talents and passions to express themselves and for the contributions they make to the cultural landscapes we live in. I let them introduce themselves, 2 minutes each to talk about themselves. But please look up and find out more about them, or about their legacies on websites, because besides what we're going to be talking about today, they are involved in a lot of things across the region. I've promised an hour for this conversation, and I'm sure that we could take all day, but we will start now. On our panel is Warren Clements, Regina Turner, Sandy Taylor, and Vikram. And I will invite Warren to speak first. Where are you, Warren?
I'm right here.
Oh, good on you. You never went far.
Thank you, January. Yes, my name is Warren Clements, and first I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Gimoy Wallabara Yidinji, custodians on which I'm actually on their land now as we speak. To everyone, my background is in the performing arts. I have been practicing traditional dance to contemporary theatre for the past 30 years. I am currently right now retired from the dance floor. My legs and my knees are pretty much getting a little bit too old, so I've taken on the new career path as being a vocational educational trainer, and I deliver performing arts. So like many Indigenous people, as we start to mature, we start to show leadership, and then of course we like to pass on our knowledge to our future generation. So I'm currently employed with the Jarrigan College, just south of Cairns. And it's a fantastic place to work with because 99% of the students here are all Indigenous. So I feel so accustomed and so blessed to be amongst my people. Thank you.
Thanks, Warren. Where are we? Regina, welcome. Are you there?
Yes, hello, January.
Yes, okay. Say a little bit about yourself before we can get into the questions. Yeah.
Well, first of all, in traditional language, Saunapa Mayem, which means welcome and greeting from the Zenath Kes, which is the Torres Strait. My name is Regina Turner. I identify myself as from my mother's side, Mabiog Wagadagam Ipkazir, which means I'm from Mobiag Island and I'm a woman from the Wagadagam clan. I also want to acknowledge my father's traditional family, the Darareb families on Mer Island, and also the Wutati Aboriginal clan, which is my father's side as well. I reside on Hammond Island, which is an Aboriginal land, and it's traditionally owned by the Karareg people. So I also respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners on which I stand here today. And I'd also like to just mention that my husband and I have gone into small business since 2017, so 3 years almost in the making. We've started a creative arts business. He's a key creative, a carver. He does 21st keys. He puts family totems on their keys. It's more around the cultural heritage, knowing about who they are and their background. And yeah, we've been, and the business name is called Panipan Designs, and Panipan is also a Mobiag language name for lightning. So he works very fastly and I need to keep up with him.
Thank you, Regina. Vikram. Oh, we've got Sandy first. Sandy, you ready?
Yes, I'm happy to.
Good on.
Just introduce myself.
Thank you.
Thank you, January. Thank you, my sister. My name is Sandy Taylor, and just a little bit about myself. And before I do that, I'd like to also adhere to our cultural protocol. I also like to respectfully acknowledge the Gimoy, Wallabara, Yidinji and Nyuranganji nations on whose country I sit, and live and breathe and bring up my family in this beautiful part of the world in Cairns. My country is inland. I'm a freshwater Murray. So my people are Kalkadoon, Narwan and Durandali. Kalkadoon on my father's side, Durandali and Narwan on my mother's side. I'm a bush girl. I grew up running through spinifex grass and chasing emus, doing all those things that you do, collecting bush tucker and swimming in freshwater when it was there and doing all the things that we used to do back home. But I certainly enjoy living in this part of the country. And when I do go home, unfortunately, I only go home now for sorry business, not for any law business, but I think it's also always important to always stay in contact with your mob back home and your family and with culture back home, and to always keep those connections strong. My husband, he was raised here in Cairns, but he's also a saltwater Murray, so our kids have a little bit of both. But we certainly are very proud to be working in this community and doing the grassroots community work that we love doing. I have a passion for empowering my people, and I really thank Arts Nexus and CIAB and the Australia Consul General for the opportunity to sit on this panel. And I think what we're going to be yarning about soon is very relevant in the context not only of Naidoc, always was, always will be, but I think language and how we unpack it in just this short presentation, I hope will be very enlightening for people listening in. And I hope somewhere down the track, there will be an opportunity to have further yarns around such an important topic. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sandy. Vikram from across the sea, thank you.
Thanks, January. Thanks, Art Nexus and the organizers. I grew up in a place called Chennai in India, where they say Vanakkam, and I live in a city called Bangalore, where they say Namaskara for a greeting. And so I'm based in Bangalore and Chennai in India, and I'm a performance storyteller and a theatre practitioner. I work with children, I work with adults, I perform for all age groups. My stories are rooted in the folklore, the myths, and the heritage that's centered around the Indian realm, in specific the southern part of India, because India is large in terms of history, in terms of language, in terms of identity. So the most of my work is centered around the southern part of India. And the languages that I speak and work with is English, Tamil, Kannada, and a bit of Hindi. And academically, I have a degree in engineering management, but after that, I've just been an artist over the many, I think my age is equal to Warren's experience and work in theatre. So yeah, so over the last few years, I worked, traveled across the country in both performing, curating, multiple festivals centered around storytelling, theatre specifically. And one of the festivals that we organize in Bangalore is the Bangalore Poetry Festival, which is celebrating the poetry of this country in various languages, of course. And a few other festivals that I work with for children and adults is the Bangalore Literature Festival, a very specific festival for children's theatre, because in India, still children's theatre is still in a very nascent space. So curating a yearly festival on that, and of all this, yes, English is my connecting medium, and Tamil, Kannada, and Hindi is the scattered language that I work with.
Thank you, Vikram. So we've had Warren, who went from traditional cultural dance to Shakespearean actor with tropical arts. We've got Regina, Torres Strait Writers Network and community leader. We have Sandy Taylor, Cairns Tropical Writers Festival, social, emotional and wellbeing sector. And we also have Vikram. Bangalore Poetry Festival, pronounce that correctly?
Yes, Bangalore.
Yes.
You bang, lu, ru.
Bangalore.
Thank you. Look, I too would like to acknowledge the Gimoi, Walabara, Yidinji and Yuruganji Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which we are streaming this conversation today, and to all First Nations people from the lands you are watching from. We would also like to pay our respects to the elders past and emerging, and thank the people of India for welcoming and allowing us to speak and share our knowledge in this virtual space. So we will now move on to question 1. Ready for it? The importance of language. Communicating is one function. Maintaining culture is another function of language. Warren, would you like to start and just give us a 2-minute, your thoughts about this particular topic?
Well, language itself, Indigenous language is a continuum which is done through body expression, right? The spoken word is only done when we speak it through body and emotion. The language is so ancient that it's not spoken, or it's not a lazy language. It's very complex, and you've got to be very careful. If you don't speak the right word, it could mean many different other things. Now, as you mentioned earlier, Shakespeare, once again, the emotion, if you relate to it, emotion, the words are spoken, but it's done through emotion. So there is that common ground that I found speaking Shakespeare and, of course, our own traditional language. Culture itself, of course, is made up of many things. It's made up of customs. It's made up of a society. It's made up of storytelling, and that is something that is unlimited. It's a continuous journey that we, as all Indigenous people, will continue to do until the end of our days. It's in a nutshell.
Thank you. Regina, how are you? What are your thoughts about this?
I'm good, thank you. Well, first and foremost, with the Torres Strait Writers Network and my involvement working with the Murukoska, which is the women's Torres Strait Peak women's organisation, we just use that sort of platform, working with Arts Nexus, to actually get our women together to actually tell story of place. We're known, the mothers, to pass down that information. No disrespect there, Brother Warren, but when it comes to family ties, who's related to who. But yeah, we started the Torres Strait Writers Network back in 2016, and we reinvigorated that group again. Now we've got, thanks to COVID, we've been able to go Zoom, and we've got families sitting all the way down in Victoria, right across to Northern Territory. And just to get those creative writing juices happening. But I totally agree with what Warren is saying. Traditional language is very complex. You don't want to say the wrong word. It means several different meanings. If you don't pronounce it right, you get in trouble as well. Not in a good way, but yeah, just making sure that we maintain that traditional language. But I've been fortunate to work as a cultural development officer with Torres Strait Regional Authority, and we launched a charter in 2017, and our little pledge that when you sign up is, in little ways or big ways, you need to be part of sharing or revitalising and maintaining traditional language. So we grew up down in Weipa. We weren't fortunate to get that traditional language. Mum and Dad were industrious people. So what do we do next is we find out who we are, and we also start embedding language into our everyday life. So our business, like I mentioned, Panipan Designs. Panipan means lightning in mother tongue.
Very interesting. Yeah, thank you. Sandy, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, look, when I look at this question, what jumps out at me is maintaining culture, or the maintenance of culture. Whilst I sit here wearing the hat of the Cairns Tropical Writers Festival, I also wear many other hats. And I just think back to language and the proliferation of hundreds of different dialects and language that our First Nations people practiced many, many years ago, prior to colonisation, and also during colonisation. And I really do feel, and I do acknowledge and value our elders and our communities that are still they're very committed to revitalising and maintaining language in all of its forms in their communities, and encouraging also our young ones to also maintain that language. I think we've undergone a lot of assaults on our language, whether it's been through all of that terrible history to do with colonisation, but it's also been through policy settings that have been perpetuated by governments of the day, particularly the federal government. I can remember years ago in the John Howard era, where that government, the Liberal government, defunded bilingual programs in the Northern Territory. And that was very devastating for the Northern Territory and all those communities. But we need to also acknowledge the resilience of our people, of our elders that refused to let their mother tongue go. And they still sat around and they still taught and yarned up and encouraged language still to be spoken. And I just think that is beautiful, and we need to still be preserving that, maintaining it, revitalising it, reaching out. And I think the marvellous thing with the Cairns Tropical Writers Festival and with Sister Regina, with what Murakoska's doing there, and what other Aboriginal communities and Torres Strait Island communities are doing elsewhere to encourage people to get to tell their stories, to put their stories down, encourage language to be infused into those literary works. I think that is beautiful. I think we will see this marvellous body of literary work in the coming years, which will again promote and show the diversity and the richness of our mob and the stories that they have to tell. And it always takes, when I think of language and I think of maintaining it and I think of the beauty of and strength in language, I remember working in Cape York, and I was at Wujal, which is a beautiful rainforest community in the Cape. And I was talking to someone about what we needed to do. This is when we were setting up our Indigenous knowledge centres in the communities. And this lady said to me that when she thinks in Gugununkel, she thinks differently. And really that says it all. When you're, for her and for her family, when they are speaking language, they are also thinking differently. And to me, once you understand that concept and you understand that when language is spoken and you're thinking differently and you're seeing the world differently because you're using your language, that's a whole different worldview from what we're speaking, which is this English language of the dominant culture. So I just want to put that there. And I've probably gone over my 2 minutes. Sorry, January. Yeah.
It was so interesting that we just let you keep going, but that was great, Sandy. Vikram Sridhar, have I pronounced your surname correctly?
Perfect. So adding on to what the others said, so similar to in India, where the lens of the language also can be viewed both from the written and the oral perspective, because written is also, many languages in India have separate scripts, like Kannada, Tamil, Bengali, Hindi don't have the same script. You have to know how to read and write that language separately itself. So that itself is a wide lens. And second is in today's time, when it's not even mother tongue, it's father's tongue, like mothers and fathers themselves speak two different languages. The cultures are slowly mixing and shifting in that perspective. But having said that, the oral form, especially in which, I mean, I've been working over the many years, the oral form lays the foundation to multiple cultural practices, especially forms like singing, storytelling, folklore, folktales, myths, our lullabies, our riddles, and our kitchen medicine sometimes, our even the sound that emerges once the baby is born from that time onwards. So the oral part is so ingrained, where the child doesn't know it's called language, and that's the first connect for the child to the world. And and traditionally it's passed from one generation to the other, and these can't, I mean, not even through writing, and these are many times oral, and writing is also a very new form of expression compared to the oral forms, and language here is a strong cultural connect, which transfers from generation to generation in mediums which can't be captured even in our widest thoughts.
Vikram, can I ask, would you speak English most of the time?
Yes, English is the connecting language. So that's what it is. I mean, so English is the language we read in schools. A lot of schools here, the learning language is English.
Yeah, thank you. Now to discuss how the colonial overhang that has resulted in the global use of English being one of the dominant languages used. Did you want to stay there and comment first, please, Vikram?
Sure. So the use of English has actually opened borders. So the India before 1947 and after 1947, this is when India got this independence from the British rule, is very different. And this has opened boundaries between cultures. I mean, even though we say Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, but then a little deeper, there's so much of differences between the cultures. So given all the this context, so English has been the language that's been connecting these cultures. And but even then, there are local variations on how it has been adopted in every culture. So even the way English is spoken to a southern part of India speaking English, to a northerner speaking English, will have its own local flavor, local dialects, local jargons, which will vary from place to place. And in one way, it's also made the world flat in a certain way that, yes, I mean, I'm able to sit and talk with all of us in here. I mean, it's made the world closer, but it has its demerits too. And there's also a new generation of children, including maybe starting from my own generation, and who ourselves have started thinking and emoting in English, which is not even spoken one generation back. My father and mother didn't go to an English medium school, and that completely has changed, and that's going on constantly, more and more even now. And especially the language of arts and culture has made English slowly as an integral medium, because English was not a medium of arts in India many decades back, where it became contemporary and then modern, and now it is a form of slowly into a traditional practice in many spaces. And a lot of literary festivals in India, especially including the Bangalore Poetry Festival, Bangalore Literature Festival, and many festivals in India today, the connecting language is English. Yes, the sessions could be in vernacular language, but still the connecting language is English. In that way, English has penetrated in connecting the boundaries of the country also.
Thank you. Can I just remind our audiences who have joined us to listen in today they can chat online from where they are in their screen. Go right down to the bottom and you will find a place to chat. Thank you. Now, can we come to Warren? Would you like to, your thoughts on question 2, discuss how the colonial overhang has resulted in the global use of English being one of the dominant languages used? Thanks, Warren.
Yeah, it is a dominant language, of course. It is quite transparent, with all my travels around the world, English is there. But I'll tell you what, that's even more dominating is body language, which is a language by itself as well. So when we look at the world, we as human beings have forgotten to communicate through body language, even though it exists. We do rely on English, which is dominating language. However, for Indigenous people, I think it is agreed that we're very good at reading body language, and that's a language in itself as well. With my teachings here at Jarrigan College, a lot of our students, their first language is actually their native tongue. And to me here, that's very sacred because it's an ancient language. So for students that, the age of 14, 15, they're becoming young adults and they're learning English. What my teaching is, I teach them alternative ways of learning and keep the English to a basic level that they can actually understand when they go into the workforce industry. Okay. English itself, over the years, it's gone from traditional formal English. Now for this modern age, it's now become so broken, normal way of speaking. We don't speak so formally anymore. So that's my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Yeah, very interesting. Sandy, your thoughts, please. Where are you?
Yep. Yeah. I'm just thinking of that word colonial overhang. I mean, that in itself has many connotations. And as I alluded to before, the dominant culture is what prevails. And so where colonisation has occurred globally, that and usually in most cases through the British colonising countries, obviously the dominant language is English. And I do agree with what Brother Warren has said, that language, or the English language, and the formalised language has been somewhat broken down over the years, and I'm sure it will be fluent also into the future. I suppose in a way you link language to culture, and just like culture in some ways still has traditional nuances, at the same time it also changes in different little forms also. So I would assume, and you do see this in terms of people speaking the English language or how they use the English language. For example, my father's people, the Kalkadoon Nation, that's actually an anglicised name. Our traditional name for our people is Kalkatungu. But when the British came and these Migli fellas come here, they anglicised it and just called us all out our way, Kalkadoon, and it is accepted. But really, that's been changed. It's been anglicised. So I think if we had to sit back and look at this colonial overhang, it is an overhang, but it's actually like a big impression, a really strong, it's a really strong enforced structural sort of form of control around language. Whilst our forefathers had to leave their mother tongue behind, or not speak it fluently, or not actually even use language in the context that they would do normally, and then had to adopt the English language, we also then started to be very creative, and with the Creole and with Aboriginal English. So in a way, we have empowered ourselves to change that language over the decades to actually be a language that we can feel comfortable with applying and using. And then the semantics around words. And as Sister Regina said there, and Brother Warren said, definitely it's around the accent on different vowels or how you pronounce a certain word, because if you pronounce it the wrong way, it could be very offensive and insulting. And I think this is where our elders and our people who have really been committed to keeping their languages going in that puerile or that traditional context, and knowing not to deviate away from it or compromise it. I really admire and acknowledge that, because they are the living cultural assets of our people, and we need to be always not only just looking after them as the cultural story holders and storytellers, but they really are the building blocks. They still need to be there to guide us and to also encourage and pass all that down through, whether it's a type of custodianship. And look, we've been there before where we've, like I said with Howard, he tried to, and he defunded things. And sometimes we just got to do this and we go, well, bugger all the funding. This is about our mob and this is about our culture. And while we got this cultural overhang, it's not going to stop us from being who we are and what we are on our country. And we have survived and we're still here, and we're going to keep going, and we will still use our language the way we want to use it.
Yes.
So that is so important, and we will keep saying it, whether it's in book form, in the virtual form, in dance, music, art, and all of the different ways that our people are so deadly and creative and resourceful. As long as our spirit is not broken, and it never will be, we will always continue to be speaking our language the way we feel we need to do it.
Thank you. Thank you. Regina.
That's so true, and I agree with Sandy. As I mentioned earlier about the traditional language charter here in the Torres Strait, I could really resonate with it. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not a traditional language speaker, but to work alongside with cultural language speaking practitioners was definitely an eye-opener for me, knowing that our languages are becoming critically endangered. You know, a lot of our language speakers are, cultural language speakers are, you know, 30 or 48 years old and over. The fluent speakers, not a word of English, they're, you know, 70 plus. And with our life expectancy for our families and our elders especially, we have a shorter life expectancy here. And those traditional old ways are being lost. And I think doing that charter, you know, doing your level of participation and how to revitalize traditional language, whether it's a little, occasionally, frequently, and always, you know, it gives people like myself hope to know that, yes, I'm more English speaking background than my own traditional mother and father tongue, as Vikram mentioned earlier, but working also with the cultural practitioners in the song, dance, music and dance audit projects. You could see with the Torres Strait Regional Authority, there was a great initiative about maintaining our language. So there was, you know, recordings of songs and dance from each Torres Strait community, and the albums with the traditional language and contemporary songs were actually recorded. These resources are available through the Cultural Centre here on Thursday Island. And, you know, it's very, you know, good to know that these things are available for our future generations. I'm also keen to work with cultural practitioners, especially our language speakers, around, you know, writing grants so that they can work on projects. And we've actually put in some applications to do some digital recordings with the traditional Miriam Mer language speakers. So While I may not speak it, and English is my most spoken language, I find that's the opportunity for me and my family, and in ways that we can contribute.
I think one of the wonderful things that I'm seeing more often now is that, when we're on the news or anything like that, we have people up there doing the Auslan signing as a, doing that. Yeah, I think that's absolutely marvellous that we've incorporated a lot of the Auslan stuff into when we're actually doing the programs. Now can we explore the implications of a unified language, and could we give it a new name, reflecting the global community that speak it? How does language relate to you? Warren, do you want to come in on this?
Not really, January. You're saying the word unify language, unify it. I think from, a traditional man of my people, the Wakaman, which is like Sister Sandy there. I'm a freshwater Murray from Western Cape York. And, my nation was 99% genocide. And my great-grandfather was the lawman that maintained the cultural essence of our people, and that language has been passed down from one generation to another. So to try and, unite that is quite difficult because it, from a traditional point of view, everything in our power right now, because there's very little of our elders left that speak the tongue fluently. And the last thing we want to do is unify that with any other foreign alien language. So I'm not sure if I'm reading that question properly, January. So I'm just, that word unified jumped at me. So if you could probably explain to me, or give the panel, maybe I listen to them or what they're saying so I can understand a little bit more on that question.
You think it might be as complicated already, because when you think, I think that English would be one of the hardest languages to learn. When you have a look at it, there's so many complexities in all the different words. They all mean the same thing and they're all used in the same way. Anyway, what are your thoughts on this, Sandy?
Look, we've been talking about English in all of its different context, I suppose, and the way we have used it as colonised people. And honestly, I think this particular question, I don't think, personally myself, I don't think we can give it a new name. English, the English language, we've got many millions of people speaking this language. Whether we give it a new name or not, it is still the act of speaking English. And I think as you were saying, January, I think for people to learn the English language, I think it is quite difficult and complex. It is one of the hardest languages to learn. But it's, I suppose, the technicality and the application of it. But in terms of giving it a new name, to me, that's obsolete. It's irrelevant. This English language is here. We've used it. It sits as the predominant language in a lot of countries, particularly that have been colonised. The way people then choose to use that language in the context of their situation and their circumstances and how they perceive the world and their worldview, that will change. But in terms of giving it a new name or trying to look at something that's unifying, I think it is already a unifying language, but it's got this baggage attached to it. And this is a thing that we need to grapple with. We need to unpack. We need to look at how the English language has been used, you know, whether it's in a positive or a negative. For example, when I think back to years ago with our people, and if anybody had a chance to read my bio, they would know that I had the opportunity to sit on the Path to Treaty Working Group, which is really conversations with all Queenslanders, which we did last year. We went around all the state and we spoke to Indigenous and non-Indigenous Queenslanders about this idea of a treaty between the state government and First Nations people. So when I think of some of the things that can come out of that in the context of language and also around truth-telling, I think of that word called dispersals. And years ago when I used to find out a little bit more or read about all of the atrocities and the massacres and the killings and all of the things that happened to our forefathers in the settling of this of Queensland and elsewhere across Australia, and reading historical documents, the word dispersal just kept jumping out at me. Well, hello, dispersal is a lovely word for it covering up the acts of massacre. So when we're talking about English, it's interesting how language can actually camouflage or trivialise or actually change the context of really the historical context or really actually what happened. So I think we really need to be very, very aware of how language can be used and abused to rationalise a situation. And as I said before, it's about the semantics of it all. And I can remember when I was a young girl living in the Brisbane community, biggest Murray community down there, and we would have the most deadliest community meetings. But I'll tell you right now, Jagger Arts, for the first hour, we would sit there and we would be bringing up names around what we were going to be talking about, because people had different perceptions and understanding of what a certain word meant. We would spend an hour in that room kicking it around. What does that mean to you? What does that mean to you? Until we came up with a collective agreement on what that word meant. And then we could begin our meeting. And they were fantastic meetings. People might have thought that was a waste of time, but no, it wasn't. It was important for people to understand what that word meant to them. And that word changed depending on your life experience, on your trauma, where you came from, how you were raised. So language is very manipulative. It really is. But it's up to us as the speakers of this language to also be inquiring. We've got to have that inquiring mind. We've got to ask those questions. We have to actually say to people, well, what does that word mean to you? Are we on the same page? Are we in lockstep? Because, brother, what you're saying, I ain't getting that. And it's okay to have that yarn. It's not being silly. It's going to the guts of it.
Okay, Sandy, thank you. Thank you. Wow, I have to take a bit of a breather there. Thanks.
I need a cup of tea.
Thank you. Happy to come in with your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Sandy, please share the tea with me also.
Oh, okay.
So my thought is, can there ever be a unified language? Because the process and the loss that happens in unification, that damage, can it ever be rectified? And today I see a lot of that rectifying taking time in a lot of spaces, in both in my own country, my own cities, and across the world, in what this unification has done to. And going a little beyond that, today even technology is has a very strong role to play in defining language, because as we move ahead in time, we have to embrace a lot of the present, and from what we take from the past, add the present and give it to the future. And especially for a global peace, do we stop and reflect on what we are doing sometime? That's a constant thought that goes when you're trying to unify. It could be countries, it could be states, it could be boundaries at any point of time, including language. And the other thought is, in the process, we might even end up losing some parts of our heritage, a language, a culture. As change, as in any part of change, loss is imminent to an extent. Like for example, the technology that we're using now to connect digitally itself might be a universal language. Because if this is not there, we wouldn't be connecting with each other. So
Yeah.
technology itself is becoming a new type of language which we never thought few decades back. And language in that way is a holistic way for me in sharing our emotions, our thoughts, our ideas in a way that the listener, the reader can connect to. And if we have to speak to ourselves, sometimes we might not need a language in the perspective that we may see today. But when there is another human involved, especially, and that's to an extent what Sandy was saying, it's for them and to make sure that do they understand what we are saying. And when there is another human involved, there is a lot at stake. And when there's a group of people, then the culture also starts appearing in a constantly changing world, especially. And I'm still questioning this thought of a unified language because it sounds beautiful from the outside, but the more we go deeper, there are a lot of wounds that are still not being healed anymore. And festivals in that way are similar when it comes to unifying language, because it involves the audience, the different stakeholders in the audience, and that's how I pause here to say that I look at a unified language. It's a gray area which I don't find an answer fully.
We've had a chat that comes in that says, I love the term connecting language rather than unified. Regina, please, would you like to have some thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts around the implications of unified language. As I mentioned earlier, here in Xenath Kes, or Torres Strait, there are two traditional languages apart from English and Creole, and there are 6 dialects as well. And Creole, we would say, and most of us would agree, is mostly used here and everywhere, whether it's in Australia or overseas. But we also refer it as Yumpla talk, which means, which is commonly referred to as Yumi, you and me, our talk. I really don't want to see it unified because we do not want to confuse, our children, people like me who don't speak the traditional language. You know, you need to know where your mother tongue or your father tongue originate from when you're speaking that language. I often find myself asking cultural language speakers, where does this word come from? Which is it? Is it from this group or this group? So English can stay on its own as a global unified used language, whereas Torres Strait, the 2 traditional languages are very specific and gives you identity. As soon as you hear that word that they pronounce, you know they're from that traditional group. Which is really important. It's around identity, like Vikram mentioned, like Sandy, their sister, mentioned as well. And it's just really important that we don't get them confused. There is some talk about basically, when we name something like Mura Kosker, the women's group, that means all women sisters. Mura is a Western language, Kosker is Eastern, one of the other traditional language. So you're getting that combination of the 2 different traditional languages, but the importance is being able to identify which word comes from where. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just read another message here? It's from Rena in Kolkata. And what Rena says is that had English not been the dominant language in Vikram's words, connecting language, then how you imagine India after 1947 would have been? Interesting. Did you want to comment, Vikram?
Complex. I mean, that's the only word I have. I mean, India is complex. I mean, yeah. So English post 1947, it's very complex. So it's political. Yeah.
Well, you've gone ahead in what I'm going to say. I was going to ask you for one word that wrapped up everything. Would yours be complex?
Yes, so it'll be complex, and also a lot of time we look outside, but it's very important to look at our own backyard, our own heritage, and then move forward.
Warren, could you say one word about our discussions today?
No, it would be very difficult to say one word.
How about 10?
5 words. I think it's very important that for Indigenous language of Australia, you know, it's the oldest language, it's the oldest culture. And I think it's very important to, and it's in our backyard. And I think it's quite sacred, it's got to be protected. It's a standalone, it's an ancient tongue. And we've got to do everything in our power in this country to really enforce it, to be part of the curriculum in the educational world, to do everything in our power to make sure that the language itself, the traditional languages, is maintained for our future generations. Because it is connection to your land. It is the very essence of your identity. It is tells you where you come from. And that's it. Yes.
Thank you, Warren. Regina, have you got a couple of words to say about our discussions today?
I have one word, and that's endangered. Like I mentioned before, the push for cultural maintenance, language, traditional language, cultural maintenance and revitalization. But traditional language and culture, they're inseparable, they're entwined, and they're interrelated. It's everyone's responsibility to maintain traditional language. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sandy.
I'd like to just read some extracts from Ullaru's statement from the heart. That's going to be my last words. Just a few paragraphs.
Yeah, a few paragraphs, please, Sandy.
Yeah, so as Warren and Regina and myself have been saying throughout this presentation, language is the source code in a sense. It ties us back to our whole identity in our land. So just to read from Ullaru's statement from the heart, and I think this was sent out prior to this presentation, but this sovereignty our sovereignty is the spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land or Mother Nature and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom remain attached thereto and must one day return hither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. Our people and our culture and we're on the oldest living landmass in the world. We've been our oral storytelling, our oral histories. We need to maintain them. We need to maintain, obviously, our language. And we also need to acknowledge that the people that are still taking this fight up and continuing language maintenance, despite cultural overhangs and everything else, we need to support them in every way. Grassroots, at the grassroots level, right through to our schooling system, right through to Path to Treaty for our state, and then obviously treaties for our other traditional owners elsewhere across the country. Language needs to sit and underpin all of that, and spiritual governance needs to sit also right in the centre of all this, because this is about spiritual governance and well-being of our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Most appropriate for this time for Naidoc 2020. Thanks, Sandy. Vikram, have you want to say a few little words now before I close? Thank you.
Just like any other change, I think English has played a role in changing, impacting our cultures. So sometimes we have to embrace it and carry it along with us. And that's, yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Now, our thanks to the Australian Consulate in Chennai, the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair, Rasen Program, and the team at Arts Front. I would also like to thank the guests for providing their insights and experiences. It's never enough time for these types of conversations. They're really interesting today. So I thank Warren Clements, Regina Turner, Sandy Taylor, and Vikram Sridhar. Thank you for joining us today, and join us tomorrow for Wednesday's session. When will I see you again? I'm not sure about that. Please share, like, and comment through our Facebook to ensure your friends and family can celebrate Naidoc with us. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And I think that topic for tomorrow could be cultural exchange. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you, January, for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you, January. Nice meeting everybody.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Never enough time. Never enough time.